we like to begin with a legend. So I'm going to tell you a story about one of the most famous heroes in all of Hawaiian legend. It's about a man who came to Hawaii from Tahiti and stayed here a while and lived here for quite a while and then went back and then came back again. When we're talking about stories in Hawaiian, the thing to understand is that there's lots of variations. It depends on the audience. It depends on the storyteller and what the intent of the storyteller is. So any stories that you hear, any legends that you hear, will have quite a number of different ways that they are told, and sometimes different places in which certain events happen. This is normal. There is no right way to tell a particular legend. Even with the Pele legends, there's all kinds of variations because Hawaiian storytelling was oral. And in the oral traditions, even used to happen in Europe, in the oral traditions, why things would be told, again, for the benefit of a particular audience, in a particular location, for teaching or sharing particular things. So there were lots of variety. So what we're going to hear is a story, part of a big epic, that I have taken several variations and combined into the short story that we'll have this afternoon. It's not about Moikeha. Moikeha was the man's name. In Hawaiian, it would be pronounced Moikeha, but we're speaking English, so it's Moikeha. And he did all kinds of exciting things, but this story is about one of his sons. So Moikeha came to Hawaii. He went through the islands. He settled on Kauai. He married two daughters of the high chief. They used to have polygamy and polygyny in ancient Hawaii. So he married the two daughters of the high chief there, eventually became high chief himself, and stayed there the rest of his life, never traveled again. One of the translations of his name actually means someone who stays a long time in one place. So while he was there, when he got older, when he became high chief also, why his children, he had 5 children by these 2 wives, and 3 of them were boys. And when he got older and the boys were grown up to young adulthood, he started thinking back and he got a yearning to see an adopted son of his. Early in his adventures, he had adopted a young man named Kahiki, and they had traveled together for a long time. And Kahiki stayed back in Tahiti, and when Moikeha came to Kauai for the last time, but he was wanting to see him. He hadn't seen him for many, many years. So he was not in a position to be able to go, and so he brought it up to his sons, and all 3 of his sons wanted to go. They wanted to be the one to go back and get their brother. But he could only let one of them go, and so he wanted the one to go who was going to be the best navigator. So he made a test. Remember, they were on Kauai, and on Kauai there's a river. When he was at the south part of Kauai, in a place called Waimea, there's the Waimea River there. So the test he gave them, he said, okay, whoever can make a tea leaf canoe and sail it from the east shore, because the Waimea River runs south, who can sail it from the east shore of the river and have it cross the river and land between my legs where I'm sitting on the west side, said that's the one that'll go. So they all did it, and the one, the tea leaf canoe that went by the elder brother went way, way over to his left. The one by the youngest older brother went way over to the right. And of course, there's Kila, who really put all of his focused attention on his father, not on his boat. And he kept his attention on his father, and the little tea leaf canoe sailed all the way across and landed between his father's knees. So of course, Kila was chosen. Now, you got to understand, That wasn't the only test, because Kila just also happened to be the best navigator in the family. But that was how they got it to be, so that there wouldn't be any jealousy. He was the one that won. Okay. So everything started being prepared, the canoes and the supplies and all the necessary information to go. Get up a canoe, getting ready to go down south. And because Tahiti is sort of south and east, southeast of the islands. I'm doing this way. From your point of view, it's like this. Okay. And when they were getting ready, Kila and his father picked out 12 people to go with him, 12 men. And there were paddlers, and there were navigators, because different navigators knew different parts of the ocean. There were pilots. This is necessary. The pilots are necessary when you get near land. And there were steersmen. And the steersman on a Hawaiian canoe does more than just steer the canoe. You know, he holds it like this toward the back of the canoe. But what he has to do, he's the one that also has to back paddle when they're getting too near a reef or something like that, and bring the canoe to a standstill. So very, very important job. So he had 2 steersmen that went with him. And finally, a very special type of kahuna, a kahuna kilo. Now, kilo, actually, if we look at the words by themselves, it means to observe. But when somebody was a master of observation and had the rank of kahuna, why, they could observe things that other people couldn't see, because they used psychic abilities as well as ordinary abilities, and even ordinary abilities, they carried them farther than most people. So the kilo could look at the stars, look at the clouds, and look at the ocean for omens, to be able to tell not only what was happening right there, but because of what he could see, what was going to happen. And so, you know, he could look way off, and he could look at the color of the sea, and he could look at the storm clouds, and he could tell whether they were going to go off in a different direction or whether they were going to come straight toward him. There's all kinds of little things that don't actually have to do with navigating, but tell you an awful lot of what's happening and what's about to happen. And traditionally, a kahuna friend of mine, Abraham Kauai, told me he was trained this way. They could, according to the stories, they can see the stars through the clouds and see the bottom of the ocean through the water. Okay? So he was a pretty good guy to have along on a voyage like that, with about 2,500 miles. So they started, and they left from Kauai. We'll say Kauai's up here. And they started, and the first place they went to was Oahu. Now, what's interesting, here we come to a very interesting, unique thing about Hawaiian culture, because, especially navigation. The first place they went to was Makapu'u, which is the easternmost point of Oahu. But he went there to visit his aunt, because on the way over, the stories that Moikeha told, he left different relatives at different places. And so the landmarks in Hawaiian by the voyagers were treated as people and talked about as people and talked about as relatives. We find this in all the great epics. You even find this in the Pele epic as well. So Makapu'u was an aunt of Moikeha, and there were a lot of families throughout this. And it was a kind of like a memory device to help them remember the landmarks more easily. And so Kila stopped there and greeted Makapu'u, his aunt, and then went through the rest of the islands and did all the greetings and made the visits of the relatives, which were really the landmarks that help him guide his way through the islands. And finally off they went to Tahiti. Here's another curious thing about Hawaiian legends and things like that. We don't hear any stories of what happened between the time you left an island group and the time you arrived. That's 2,500 miles. That's a long time, but in the stories it's as if nothing happened. We don't hear stories of storms and shipwrecks, and they left, and then they arrived in Tahiti. Okay, very curious. So in Tahiti, he was looking for his brother, La'amaikahiki, and searched all over the island, could not find him anywhere. Did all his best searching that he knew how, nowhere could he find him. Until finally he came to a woman who was a kahuna, a different kind, and she told him how to find his brother. So it seems his brother was also a kahuna, was also a priest. But his brother, only on certain nights of the moon, would beat a drum like Kila had never heard, and they would have dances in the temple. And Kila never heard of that either. When I say certain nights, the Hawaiian calendar was a moon calendar. And so they always counted the nights, not the days. Sun was not very important as far as the calendar went. So the month was divided up into groupings of different kinds of days for different kinds of activities. And some of them were for prayer and rituals and things like that. And so those were the kapu nights. So Kila had to wait around until there was a kapu night coming. And then he heard the drums way, way off in the mountains someplace. Followed the sound of the drums. This, in storytelling, would take a very long time. So we're just going to say there was nothing happened in between the time he left the hut and the time he reached the mountain. So there he is, and he comes up and he reaches the temple where the drum is playing, and he goes in to the hut where only men are allowed. And there is La'amaikahiki alternately with other priests beating the drum and doing this special type of dance in honor of the gods. And so he waited until that was through and then greeted him as his brother and brought tokens. This is what the Hawaiians would often do. You'd bring something that belonged to somebody that would prove you were who you said you were. Right? And so we even find that in a lot of European medieval romances and things like that. So anyway, he greeted him. They had a wonderful hug, and a honi actually is what they would have done, where they pressed their noses together and inhaled each other's aroma. That's a traditional Hawaiian kiss, okay, and greeting. They don't rub noses. That's Eskimo, okay? Hawaiians press noses and share breath. So they did that, and so he got ready to come home, and on the way they came. Traveled back on the ocean, came to the Kauai again finally, just zip, just like that. And then there was a great joyful reunion with Moikeha and the other brothers and the whole family. And La'amaikahiki stayed there for a very long time, and then he traveled to the other islands. And another following legend is that he's the one who brought hula to the islands, or at least that type of hula. It depends on the storyteller, which is the fact. There's lots of stories about who brought the hula to the islands too. Okay, but anyway, so that's one of them with La'amaikahiki, and eventually Kila became the high chief of Kauai as well. And under the reign of Moikeha and under the reign of Kila, Kauai had one of its golden ages. Okay? So that's one of the reasons why Moikeha had a longer story, but it doesn't fit our topic today. But that's why he's one of the considered the great heroes of Hawaiian history or legend. Now, we tend to call it legend because it was an oral tradition, but the Hawaiians don't see things that way. Just to give you a point of view, I remember one time I attended a lecture given by a Hawaiian on the geology of these islands. He worked in the geology department, University of Hawaii, and so he gave this lecture and he told about how the islands formed by the volcano, building up and building up and building up, and then every 20,000 years a seed would be brought to the island in some fashion, and gradually things grow. And he went through the whole story, which is what you'll typically hear from a Hawaiian geologist. And then when he finished, he said, and of course, that's the Western myth. Let me tell you how it really happened. Wakea and Papa got together, and they gave birth to the islands, and then he went on with the Hawaiian version. Okay? And from the point of view he was using, that's how it happened. The other was the Western mythology of how it happened. What I like particularly about that kind of thing is, for the Western idea, it's only a guess. They weren't there. They don't really know. They're trying to guess how it happened by what they see today. Okay, so who knows? And anyway, that was just a couple points of view that are in this Hawaiian way of thinking. Now we get to the point here. I mean, this was enjoyable, and I was trying to teach you some Hawaiian culture at the same time. But the topic for today is how to hold your focus. And what we see in the story is, of course, how Kila held his focus. And the first part of the story we see was when he was going to sail that canoe to land it between his father's legs, he put all of his attention where he wanted something to happen. And with that focus of attention, helped to guide it until it came about. Now, years ago, when I used to do a lot of skiing, I made some experiments along this line. And because, you know, skiing is a wonderful sport if you want to learn how to hold your focus. Okay? You have to stay in the present moment if you're skiing. You don't start thinking about what you're going to do when you get downhill, or what you did, what's over the next ridge, or you have to be there. But I was trying something a little different. So as I'm skiing down the hill, I put my attention, when I wanted to turn to the right, I didn't do anything by shifting my weight or moving the sticks or anything like that. I put my attention on the right. And of course, I wasn't going over moguls at the time. But anyway, I put my attention on the right. And I started skiing to the right. My body did something, shifted weight or did whatever was necessary without a dramatic change. But I skied to the right, and I put my attention over to the left, and I skied to the left. And I went down this fairly narrow path, skiing all the way down to only shifting my focus from side to side, and my body followed. Okay? So this is one of the things that's learned how to do when we're in navigation. There's even some other stories that talk about something similar in some of the stories of Maui and some other people. It's you putting your attention where you want to go. Now the really good thing is it doesn't just take place physically. When I was doing it, I was letting my body move in that direction. But the same is true if you're trying to hold an emotional focus, hold a mental focus, achieve something in your life, change a situation, do healing. One of the things when we're teaching massage, we teach some forms of Hawaiian massage. And some people are very surprised when they begin to take the class because we teach them how to keep their focus on what they're doing. And when they're doing that, they have more energy and they have a stronger effect on the person they're working with. And some of them have come from traditions where you just let your hands do the work and you can think about anything you want. And if you ever get a massage like that, it's not a lot of fun. Okay? You get a real sense that the person isn't there, and you have to keep looking up every once in a while. Even though you can feel their hands, there's no energy, there's no presence. So even in healing work, learning how to hold your focus is a great thing to learn. So one of the things that you do to help you hold your focus is awareness. Now, I don't mean the kind of awareness where you're just aware that something's happening. I mean engaged awareness, sensory awareness. And both so that the kind of awareness that keeps you interested in what's happening. Because that's going to help you hold your focus if you're interested. Okay? You can be interested intellectually, interested emotionally, interested physically. And with physical, that means sight, sound, and touch primarily. The smell, of course, is great, but it doesn't help you hold your focus for very long. Okay? But the other kinds of things will help you stay interested if you put your attention on those things. One of the problems we have in education today is that not the children, they're not the problem. The problem is that most of the ways that they're taught is to make the subject as boring as possible, okay? Or in other kinds of ways that just not make it interesting at all whatsoever, okay? And this is not the way to teach. This is why in ancient Hawaiian, most of the ancient traditions around the world, most of the teaching was done by storytelling. That's how you learned things. That's how you remembered what you learned. Because you could remember a character doing something, because if we were doing this story I just told you in a real Hawaiian style, we'd be here for the rest of the day at least. Because I would stop and tell you in detail. If they did the canoe, I'd have to tell you how a canoe was made, and how they did the lashings, and how the food was prepared. The whole thing would be in great detail because it was done for teaching. Okay? I'm just teaching you some ideas related to it, but in a really traditional way, that's what would keep people's attention and make it interesting enough to hold their attention. And children today are not the same. Sorry, they're not the same as children were, let's say, in the 50s, or even at the turn of the century. We have an educational system today that was designed for assembly lines, people who are going to work on assembly lines. And they're not doing that anymore, hardly. There's a few. But today, attention is very, very different in what it takes to hold your attention. The television commercials do a tremendous, especially the drug commercials, do a tremendous amount of research on human behavior and human attention. And in that research, one of the things they found that the maximum time that a person can actually hold their attention comfortably, let's say most people, okay, is 6.5 seconds. This is why if you really pay attention, if you pay attention to a commercial, you'll see the switches, the moving, the things are going, and scenes are changing all the time, okay? If you see this in most of the new series that are coming on the television, you know, the dramas or the action adventures or whatever they are, it's the same thing. They keep switching. The scenes or the perspective or something keeps moving. They keep it moving, they keep it moving, they keep it moving. Because that's what people are getting used to. News stations, if you pay attention. Try Bloomberg if you want to see an extreme. But what they're doing is keeping your attention by having several things to look at. So they've got something going down on the bottom, and they've got something sometimes going up on the top, and then they've got changes going on in the center and sometimes on the side. And boy, for us old folk, okay, what are they doing? What are they doing? But for the young people, yeah, of course. That's what keeps them looking at it. Okay? And so this, from the eldest times we had to have interest, but this is getting even more and more different ways to do that nowadays. So awareness, engaged awareness. And you can do this on your own by paying more attention to the parts of something that interest you, intellectually, emotionally, physically, whatever. Purposely putting your attention on those things to help keep your interest in something. Now at the same time, here's another thing to help hold your interest. I told you about all these changes that were going on. It's the freedom to shift your focus. It sounds strange, but shifting your focus can help you hold your focus. because of that attention span thing. Okay? In World War II, American bomber pilots had to be trained not to keep their attention on a target. Because if they did, while the plane's flying along and they keep looking at the target, they go into trance. Some meditation formats do that on purpose. That's the purpose of some kinds of meditation. You look at a flower or a rock or hold one word or something like that. Okay? And if you want to go into trance, that's fine. But otherwise, what these pilots had to learn was to kind of bounce their attention around the target and look at it and look to the edge and look over here and look there and look back at it. And that's how they were able to hold their focus. If you are engaged in some kind of activity where it requires keeping your focus for a good while, what you want to do is take a break from that focus. Doesn't have to be a long break. It could be a look out the window. It can be getting up to get a glass of water. It can be looking at something else for a moment. What I do is a little strange, but I've developed the habit of, if I'm on a task that I have to do, but I don't have to be fully engaged, then I like to have the television going in the background and maybe some music playing as well. Okay? And I can shift my attention back and forth and get all my work done more efficiently, strangely enough. When I'm writing, however, I turn everything off, but I still pay attention every once in a while to something small, like the sound of the rain or something else that's around my computer, but it's a flash and come back, because breaking that focus helps me stay focused. That really works well too. Okay? Now, when we something we can do is, when we're wanting to hold our focus, if there's some way on something, especially long term, but if there's some way in which we can make it fun, if we can turn it into a game somehow, or we can make it, this is almost like interest, but it's a kind of like a deeper thing. You're not waiting for the interest to come. You're creating the interest yourself. One of my sons, when we used to live in Africa, and when we were coming back, getting ready to come back from Africa, he was being taught in French. Now, at our table, at home, he would speak to me in French, he would speak to Gloria in English, and he had some American speaking and English speaking friends, but he wasn't getting a lot. And getting ready to go home, I got him onto comic books. And so he learned colloquial, this is the beauty, colloquial English from the comic books, and had a very enjoyable time doing it. One of my grandsons, he was having trouble reading, but then he got involved in computer games, and that's where he learned to read. Because he had to be able to read and write to communicate with the other players. He was doing one of these multiplayer games. And he had to learn to read and write. There was his motivation. It was in a game situation, so the stuff they talked about was relevant, and which is another educational problem. And it made it fun as well. So I just have to throw this as kind of like a sideline. We're shifting focus just so we can hold our attention. Well, he was telling me one time, he was in these multiplayer games where it's like sword and sorcery or Dungeons and Dragons type things. They get together and as a team. There were people playing from all over the world. And you get together with a few of these people as a team, and you take on some big monster together in cooperation. So they had just conquered some monster, and there were three of them, and they were talking, and they went out of character. You can do that, to just talk normal conversation. And one of them happened to tell where he was from, and happened to mention that he was 30 years old. And just so they get to know each other a little bit better, The next guy told where he was from, and he was 22. And then they asked this dwarf warrior who was really tough, and they asked him, how about you? And he says, I am from Hawaii, and I'm 7. Wow, okay, that's a whole new kind of environment to be able to operate in. So we get to this thing of making it fun. Now, one of my sons, I will also tell you, he was having trouble reading, but it was, in school, and they didn't have those kinds of computer games at this particular time. So what I taught him how to do was, on the book that he had to read, make a design with his imagination, make a design around the edge of the book that was a kind of a design that he created, that he liked, and if he wanted to make flashing lights, okay, or neon colors, or whatever he wanted to, and his reading improved. He would just make the book look more interesting, okay, and that worked for him, okay. So there are things we can do in projects or tasks we have to make the thing more interesting. Lots of stuff we can do, but we have to be free to be able to use our imagination there as well if we don't have something else taking care of that. Now, the reason I say that is because if you're just passively waiting for something to please you, you're never going to accomplish anything that takes a while to do. You just won't be able to hold the focus, okay? Because you'll come up with the idea that, no, I'm not having fun doing that anymore, which means no one is making it enjoyable for you, okay? That's a loser, okay? You've got to do that if it's something important to you, whatever it might be. Okay. Now, something that for, again, long-term projects, this is going to help you hold your focus a long time. The number one important thing is a benefit. But the benefit has got to be a pleasurable benefit. Now again, we can get pleasure from some of us from intellectual things, emotional things, physical things, whatever it is, there's got to be a pleasure. And it doesn't, the thing about long-term tasks is it doesn't have to be an immediate pleasure. If it's something that you can see that you will either get through doing it, or you will give yourself a reward for having done it, that kind of thing will work. That kind of thing will keep you motivated. However, some people try this. For instance, there are certain kinds of things where you make a board and you cut out pictures and you put them on of your yacht or your mansion or having fun or a person, whatever. You've probably heard or seen of that kind of thing. Okay? That works for a while. It works until it becomes wallpaper. It's the same thing like putting an affirmation note on your mirror. Doesn't take very long before you don't see it anymore. Okay? It's a human phenomenon called attention blindness. Okay? When we get too used to something, okay, it just becomes part of the overall picture and we don't pay attention to it, and therefore it has no effect anymore. You say, well, my subconscious can see it. Your subconscious is seeing billions of things every second. Okay? And it's got, in order to have it pay attention to one thing, you've got to make it stand out somehow. When you're involved in something and you're finding it difficult to keep your focus, what's really, really useful is if you can do something to jolt you into asking the question, why am I doing this? And I don't mean in a whining way, because people who do it that way aren't really asking the question, okay? I mean, really, what's the benefit here? What's the purpose? What am I going to get out of this? Why am I doing this? Now, here is where, if you think that what you're doing is important, if it's a career, if it's a school, if it's a relationship, whatever it might be, you have to either think of a benefit and bring it to mind, have it not very far from the front of your mind, frequently, right? So that you keep getting recharged. Or you've got to create a benefit. The reward kind of thing is something that you mentioned. Well, if I graduate from university, I'll take a month off in Europe, okay? That's fine if you can get excited about a month off in Europe and keep that excitement all the way through, okay? So rewards work fine when they're a pleasurable benefit, but you have to keep not thinking about them all the time, but have some way to remember, this is why I'm doing this, right? Whatever it is. Okay? One of the most powerful motivations is the feeling of loving. It's a good feeling to do something loving, and being loved. No. Listen what I said. I didn't say the powerful motivation was loving and being loved. Because you can be loved and not care or not notice. Feeling loved is the motivation. And when that happens on its own, it's a wonderful thing. What I want to tell you, it doesn't have to happen on its own. You have the ability, if you think something is important enough, to create that feeling. And let that be your motivation. Okay? The other thing, the other second most powerful motivation for doing something is to feel the feeling of being confident, the feeling of being effective. Again, it's the feeling. You might be really competent in something, but not feel that way, then you're not going to get any benefit from that. You can create the feeling. Also, along with that one, there's a wonderful feeling. Actually, it's part of the feeling of confidence and effectiveness when you help other people feel more confident and effective. That kind of like doubles your benefit. Okay? But if it doesn't happen on its own, you can use your imagination, you can use your expectations, you can use yourself to generate that feeling. I was giving this same talk earlier today, and somebody asked, well, how do you generate that feeling? Okay? I see imagination, but how do you energize it? I was talking about energizing the feeling. And I said, well, jumping up and down is one way. Okay? Of course it is. You could jump up and down. You can even imagine jumping up and down about something. You can, some people have called it fake it till you make it. And what that means is, it really doesn't mean fake it. It means if you're not feeling a particular way, generate the feeling with your imagination and pretend that it's exciting or fun or you're feeling the way you want to feel. And if you'll do that for a while, you'll start to feel that way. Your body can't help it. And then your mind will start going in that direction as well. You can create it for yourself. You don't have to wait for the universe to give you the motivation to do something, is what I'm getting at. Okay? So these are just a few of the ideas. Specific techniques, there's hundreds and hundreds of books out there. Okay? But here's the secret. They only work if you practice them. Okay? I was surprised how many people are surprised by that. Okay? They're there, but you've got to practice them. But they're all out there. All the secrets of the universe are available today. Okay? They're there. You got to look for them, and then you got to practice them. Okay? And so that's my story. Pipi holo ke ka'au. So goes the story. That's a traditional finish.